Today I want to talk about a very important topic that relates to the work that I do, and it's called divine listening. Now, divine listening is probably not like anything that you've heard about before, simply because very few human beings know how to listen divinely. And what I mean by that is that usually we listen one of three ways. The first way is very superficially. We're listening to people in a conversation in a party, or overhearing a conversation that's taking place in a bus station. Or we're just listening to our spouse. Maybe we're just not listening at all. We're tuning out. We're reading the paper. We're doing something else. Superficial listening means you've got the basics. You've got the headlines. You understand the subject matter, but that's about it. Doesn't go much further than that. The second form of listening is listening to problem solve. You're listening to someone with the eye toward fixing a problem, fixing a person's suffering, doing something to alleviate their difficult situation. This is a very important form of listening and used very effectively in therapy and in other forms of listening by people who fix things like plumbers, engineers, electricians, architects, people like that who are listening in order to solve problems. It's a very left brain type listening and usually involves a very analytical understanding of the situation. And obviously there are varying degrees of listening in terms of problem solving, because a lot of times listening to solve problems can happen on different levels, and we're going to get to that a little later, even on the level of divine listening. But primarily, problem solving, listening to solve problems, means that your attention is basically on a problem. The third aspect of listening is empathic listening, where you're listening to someone, a loved one. Lovers might listen to each other empathically. You're not listening to solve a problem, you're listening because you really love that person, because you're really feeling the presence of that person and you want to be with that person. That's essentially the highest form of listening that we've known about most of our lives. There is, however, a fourth level of listening that we do in the logical soul. And it has nothing to do with problem solving per se, it has nothing to do with love per se, and it certainly doesn't have to do with anything superficial. And I'm calling it divine listening because it has a very special role in the logical soul process. In fact, it's the first step in the logical soul process because it involves listening as if this person in front of you were a divine being. That, in essence, is what divine listening is all about. When you listen to a divine being, if in fact you perceive this person as a divine being, how do you normally think of that person? How would you think of such a person? Well, in my mind, listening to one who is divine simply means I'm listening as if I were at the feet of my guru. I'm listening as if I were at the feet of the master, someone who is really imparting wisdom, someone who is really giving understanding, imparting transformation to me. Now, I know that sounds a little far-fetched when we talk about divine listening and listening to a client, for example, when a lot of times a client will just go on and talk about things that have nothing to do with the situation at hand. Maybe they've got a problem. Maybe they've got a situation going on. If we are life coaches, for example, and we're listening to a client, we're listening for what lies between the words, not necessarily the words themselves. And the words themselves impart a special meaning in the context of what lies between them. To give you an example, I'm listening to someone who has a money problem. They come to me and they say, I have a particular money problem. I'm not attracting much money. I'm not able to make much money. I'm just not earning enough. I'm not attracting enough. What do I do? After listening to this person for 5-10 minutes sometimes, it dawns on me quite often that the problem is usually never what the person thinks the problem is. In other words, the problem is not about money per se, but it's usually about something like relationships or health or something related to something else besides money. Because you can't put money in a vacuum and say we're going to deal with money. There's always something around it. In fact, let's say that every subject that you could talk about has its corresponding echoes. And an echo is simply a reverberation into other aspects of your life that may or may not have to do with the thing at hand. Earning money, for example, has a lot to do with whether or not your parents earn money. My father had difficulty earning money in his life. In my life, I also had a lot of money earning money. And one of the reasons I discovered was that I had an unspoken tie to my father, an unspoken vow to my father that I would not earn more than he did. Now, he never imposed this on me. I never agreed to such a thing. However, there was an unspoken law that was in my own consciousness that said if I earn more money than my father, I'm being disrespectful. Or if I earn more money than my family, I'm being disrespectful. It's almost as if our ties to our families and our tribe are more important than the money itself. So the relationships there have a huge impact on our ability to earn money or accept money, this type of thing. Now, you only get to that point when you're listening for what I call the very good reason why a situation exists. Someone comes to me with money problems. If I'm sitting there and I'm listening, divine listening, I'm listening to that person not as someone with a problem that I need to fix. I'm listening to that person as someone who is a divine being who, for some reason, has decided to hide this solution from his conscious mind. And so I'm listening to two beings in this person. I'm listening to the subconscious being, and I call it a being, not a thing. It's not a subconscious mind, for example, because we tend to compartmentalize ourselves and say this part is subconscious, this part is conscious, and together we form this whole called an individual. And Western psychology is rife with that understanding, that worldview. What I'm talking about is there's a being in there called a subconscious being that you can actually communicate with, who will tell you things that if you listen divinely, the understanding will dawn on you very quickly. If you approach a person as if they were one person and you're only listening to that voice as if they were one person, an ego, and they don't understand why this problem exists, then you can say, well, this person has a problem, let's see if we can solve the problem. Divine listening is an understanding that the person is more than just the talk, more than just the speech, more than just the person doing the talking. It's the subconscious being who is also saying things by not saying anything, and the higher self that exists within that person that is actually manifesting these things in their lives. So divine listening is a listening with understanding that the person or the being in front of me is divine. It has already all the answers it needs, and it's simply my job to listen to that divinity speaking as if there were a very good reason for this condition to exist the way it exists. If the person does not have money, there is, in fact, a very good reason for that person not to have money right now. If this person was without a relationship and they want a relationship, there's a very good reason subconsciously why this person does not have a relationship. If the person has ill health, something's not working in their bodies or their minds, there's a very good reason why that person has that particular condition. We may not see it, we may not understand it, and we may not even be able to fix it. However, that very good reason is the driving force in that person's life. I call it a prime directive. It's the subconscious being's prime directive to go in that direction, and that's the reason why they have not been able to change this situation before. If, in fact, they've tried many, many times to change it, and it has not changed. Granted, you can hypnotize, you can use NLP, you can use other forms of therapies and this, that, the other to change a person's life. However, that person their lives will not change unless the subconscious being is on board, unless the subconscious being allows that change to take place. Divine listening allows us to go in and understand what that reason is that blocks them, so that once you understand the very good reason, then the solution is right next to it. This is Dr. Michael Craig. Thank you for listening. I've got more of the same coming very soon.